all really relies on having good quality field data. And so if at the data collection stage you fail to catch errors as they're occurring or to correct errors that have already occurred, you're providing a weak foundation for all of the uses and analyses of these data at a later stage. So we really try to emphasize the importance of quality assurance and quality control at the get-go, because now while you're collecting field data is when we have the ability to catch errors and correct them with confidence. After the field season is over, our ability to both detect errors and to correct errors really decreases dramatically. And to the point where if we correct an error, we may actually just have to throw the data out rather than making a good guess, or we're doing some sort of hocus pocus trying to figure out what the true value was. And it can be even more damaging if we can never even catch the error and go on to make management decisions based on faulty data. So to the extent possible, we really would like to reduce the amount of errors in our data. So we often talk about quality assurance and quality control as sort of one big blob of a concept. And really, they're two distinct components in data management and ensuring data quality. So quality assurance is a proactive process to minimize the chance of your inserted into your data. And so this is things like making sure that you have proper training to make sure you're doing the method correctly in the field, that you're following the protocol so that problems don't occur and are not embedded in the data in the long run. And quality assurance can also mean like you catch the error as it happens so you can correct it and it doesn't get propagated forward. In contrast, quality control is reactive. So at this point, errors have already happened, and all we're trying to do is detect the errors that have occurred and correct them if possible before they move on to being used as part of an analysis or management decision. So this is a quantification process. Oftentimes errors that we find during quality control we cannot actually do anything about, but we're just saying, hey, we know they're here, and this is a use constraint of these data given the errors that are in the data set. So quality assurance and quality control happen at distinct times relative to your data collection. The general QAQC timeline should be up on the screen. Hopefully this isn't a new timeline for you in terms of thinking about collecting data and finalizing your data, submitting it to the NOC for ingestion into Teradata, and then using your data. The important thing to notice in this timeline is that quality assurance is always happening. So quality assurance is catching errors in the moment. And so there are always errors that we can insert into any point in the process where we want to make sure that we are catching them or preventing them from occurring. And so quality assurance is a baseline process, whereas quality control happens at distinct. Okay, thanks for the message, Tanya. Let me see if I can. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So here's the timeline again. This is a generic timeline. It's not specific to any one project. So if your field season starts in February and ends in May, you can adjust this general relative timeline so that your training is starting at an appropriate time for your field season, and the QA and QC steps are happening throughout the process. As I said before, quality assurance is a baseline process, and it's ongoing from every step of the way. So from training and calibration all the way through ingestion into Teradata and serving it back out to you. Everyone who is touching and interacting with these data is keeping quality assurance in mind. In contrast, quality control is happening more at distinct points, and so that's when we stop and we take a formal review of our data and note any errors that exist and correct them where possible. So in general, for when we're talking about quality assurance, we're just following some principles of being alert, being cognizant of where we are, preventing errors from happening in the moment, asking, does this make sense? Following proper technique, whether that's proper method in the field, the proper technique for entering data. You know, every place where we have protocols in place, following those protocols helps to prevent errors from being introduced. And one of the major ways that we can use QA is use electronic data capture. And that's one of the huge advantages to using DIMA, is that we can enter data in the field. We have a database that will help us correct and catch errors in the moment as they happen and say, are you sure about that? I don't think that canopy gap is quite 20 centimeters. I don't think that this should be entered in. And so we can prevent ourselves from entering data, and then we also prevent transcription errors at a later date. And as we move through this, we have 3 QA and QC rules of thumb. I call them the 3 C's. One is completeness. So are you following the method completely? Are your data sheets complete? Is your data set complete? And then once it's complete, we ask, is it correct? It's all well and good to have a full data sheet, but if the data in there aren't correct, then that kind of defeats the purpose of having a complete data set. And thirdly, we're asking, is this consistent? Are the measurements that we have recorded in DIMA consistent with what we see in the field? Are they consistent between methods? So if we had bare ground from LPI was 20%, but canopy gaps greater than 20 centimeters, maybe with 80% of our line or our plot is canopy gaps greater than 20 centimeters, that doesn't quite jive between these 2 methods. And so we might look to see if there was some sort of technical error that occurred that is producing 2 completely different indicator estimates. All right, are there any questions? Okay, so moving on to DIMA and actually working with the database. Some basic principles of QA with DIMA, upgrading your DIMA to the most up-to-date version. The most current version was released in January. It's version 3.1. If you are not working with that particular database, I encourage you to go to the Hornado website and download it, because we're continuously adding additional QA checks to help you prevent errors, as well as responding to other requests that just make the format of the database and working with the database a little bit more streamlined, so that errors can't be introduced on accident. Keeping an eye on Microsoft updates, being aware of when your computer or access is updated. Sometimes that will interact with how DIMA performs on your computer. And so knowing when those updates occur, and then if any issues occur with your database subsequently, they may be linked to those Microsoft updates. So it's good to know about that structure on your computer. The third principle, which applies both to data sheets and to working with electronic data, is maintaining a consistent structure and nomenclature for your sites and plots, so that someone who maybe is looking at your data later can say, oh, this plot was actually supposed to be in this site, and that makes sense. They can understand your organization scheme, and organization just helps to make sure you're entering data for the correct plot and site. If unless you have a question, if you could stay muted, that would be really helpful. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available online later. So the final things to maintain with DIMA and maintaining quality assurance are backing up regularly and archiving old copies. If you have paper data sheets that are associated with your database, organizing and all of these paper data sheets is really helpful for being able to detect errors later on at the QC stage and making sure everything's a nice, tight data package. And finally, if and when errors occur or you miss data, to keep a log of your missing data and submit that to the NOC at a later date for QC. And just say, hey, we know this error exists, and it just helps us with the ultimate use of the data at a later date if we know what's missing, and then we can judge the degree of impact of these missing data or errors. Okay, so now I'm going to pull up DIMA and do a little bit of demonstration of what we might look for when we're doing both QA and QC with DIMA. For this particular webinar, I'm not going to focus on the actual data entry component, as we cover that in many of our online trainings as well as previous webinars. So if you're curious about the data entry process in DIMA and some of the QA steps that are present there, I'd encourage you again to go to the landscape toolbox. But here we have a database, and if this happened to come from your field office, I have gone in and introduced errors into this database, so I am not attacking you. If I find an error, and this is not an error that actually exists in your data. But we have a DIMA database, we have our home screen here, and I'm in the middle of the field season. I have the ability to make some corrections. How am I going to look at these data and correct errors where I'm still able to make changes to these problems? And so the first thing I'm going to do is look at the site organization and structure. So I have my 5 sites here, 501, 561, 759, June Monument, and the treatments. And I'm just going to take a quick look through. Looks like I only have one plot in this site, another just one plot, a third. I have several plots here. It doesn't really look like the nomenclature is very consistent, and so it might be easy for me to be confused about where I'm entering or which plot I'm working with, because there's so many different types of plot names here. So that might be something I would work with my project lead to correct. But keeping in mind that it's really important that your plot name is identical to the design plot name. So if this happened in your design, then this is the plot name you need to live with. So again, it looks like I have a number of different treatment plots here. If I wanted to just go and explore the plot metadata, I would select this plot here as I have in black and select Edit Plot. And here I can see we haven't actually entered very much plot metadata. One thing I might be keeping an eye on is the plot establishment date. This is 2015, so if it says 2013 in this field, I might want to stop and think, oh, did somebody come back in 2013 and actually set this plot up, and now we're monitoring it in 2015, or did we actually establish this plot in 2015, and therefore this 2013 date is incorrect? So I know that we actually set this plot up in May of 2015, so I'm going to change the plot establishment date. Ecological sites, we don't have ecological sites defined for this area, so that's blank and that's okay. But I can see that the field crew hasn't entered in much of the soils data yet, and so I would go back to them and say, hey, did you guys just not collect soils data here, or can we please get this moved from a paper data sheet into DIMA? One of the other major things I'm going to look at is the GPS coordinates, because this is how we track where the data were collected. And so if it's not housed in DIMA, that coordinate is not ingested up into Terrestrial, and then is not served back out to the field office for use. And so we don't actually have any GPS coordinates entered for this plot. And so that's a problem. And so again, I would go back to the field crew and say, hey, what's up? Like, do we have these coordinates? Can we enter them here? If we don't have the coordinates, that's where we, unfortunately, we just have to say, okay, well, we don't have those data. And we would probably have to throw the whole plot out. Okay. So there's just some basic visual inspection things you can do to double check that all of your plot metadata was entered correctly in this plot description field. You can click through the various tabs and explore the different information that was entered and check that it makes sense with what you know about the plot. We can also use the reporting function in DIMA to look at a lot of data in a more wholesale way. So we can look at everything that exists within the database. So if I select reports, I get to this screen where I can select all of the sites I want to work with, and in this case I want to work with all of the data that are in this database. If I wanted to only work with a specific date range, I could select different date ranges here. And then there's a number of reports available to you in DIMA, and most of them are tied to specific methods. However, we do have two sort of broad-scale plot metadata level reports that we can run, and one is the method tracking report. And so I'm going to select that and then select the report and hit go. And now I can open up an Excel table that shows all of the data that are currently housed in DIMA. And so I can look at the site, all of the sites, all of the plots. It looks like I have 25 plots in this database. And again, I would be checking, okay, does that make sense? Do I know that the field crew has done 25 plots so far in the year? Then yes, there should be 25 plots. If I know they've done 45 so far, I would start to ask questions, where are those other 20 plots? I can look at the ecological site. Again, that hasn't been defined for this area, but I could know how many ecological sites we've visited this season. I can look at the established date range, the number of transects that were set up for each plot, and then I can also see how many transects do I have various method data for. So for gap intercept, it looks like I have a couple plots where I only had 2 lines. And so I might go through and identify a couple of these problem areas. Again, for line point intercept, it looks like we're missing some data. And so again, I would go back to the field crew and say, hey, what's up? Like, do we have paper data sheets, or do we just not have data? And if we don't have data, then I will note that in the log and carry on. Okay. So, and so on and so forth. I can look at all of the methods and ID areas where I'm missing data. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to look at is go back to DIMA, and I'm going to run a species report. And here I'm checking, okay, were the species that are being found by the field crew, do they make sense for the species that I know exist on the district? Are they making up species codes? Things like that. So I'll go to species reports and method species recorded and hit go. And once again, we can view the report in Excel. I move over to this tab. And so here we have, in the A column, we have the plants USDA species code. In the B column, we have the the scientific name, and then the method in which they're found. And so I'm looking for, okay, are these actual species codes? Like here we have Arter2, comma. And so that's an error that was introduced at some point. And so I'll want to go in and fix that. So I'm going to note that. I'm going to take a quick scan down, making sure that all of these species are species that make sense for that area. Looking for codes that maybe were introduced by accident. And so here I have a KRLA and a KRLA2. And so at this point, I would want to go to plants.usda.gov and make sure both of these species actually occur. And if not, I might say, well, actually, I think you just forgot to put the 2 on the end of that code, and so that's a problem, and I would highlight that and go and update. And then similarly over here in the methods, I want all of the species that occur on line point intercepts should occur in your species richness survey. And so I want to make sure that those are being recorded. And so if they're not, that means that my species richness is going to be an underestimate of what was actually found on the plot. And so I'm going to go through and identify some areas where we need to go in and update the species richness survey. Okay, so that's a brief overview of looking up species. If you find an incorrect species in a report, it is possible in DIMA to do a mass update of those species. And to do that, you would go to administrative functions and then mass update of a species code within a site or a plot. Log in, the password is always 49. Select the site where you had that incorrect code, and you optionally select the plot. And then you would say, okay, actually KRLA, we're going to change that to KRLA2. And so that will do a mass update of all instances on the plot. And so then hopefully that error has been corrected, and in the future I wouldn't see it. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to demonstrate all of the other methods and ways that you can look at data, but I will point out a couple of highlights. Line point intercept, again, you select all of the sites and select the report. The indicators report is a great way to look at a lot of different indicator estimates, and again, you would pull that out and say, is this making sense? Is the amount of bare ground, the foliar cover, for grass cover, are all of these consistent with what I'm seeing on the plot, what I'm seeing with photos, what I know of this particular area? Just sort of broad level gut checks, really critical to be looking at. The other really helpful report is the all detailed data report, and I will run this one. This allows you to broad scale look at all of the data at each point as it was collected. And it opens as a text file, but I find it helpful to move over into an Excel file. And if you do data and text to columns, you can convert it into an Excel format. And so now we have our site, plot, line, the date that data were collected, the point locations, so that's every point along the line where data were entered, the point number, and then each of your top, lower, and soil surface canopy codes hits. And this is also a really great way to take a look at your height data and to make sure that all of the height data that were supposed to be collected were collected. So it looks like every 5th point height data were entered, and that's good. Looks like maybe height was missed here, and so I would go back and say, okay, yeah, at point 50 we should have had a height entered, and that's an error. And so that would then go on the log of we missed a height measurement. And you know, missing a measurement like that isn't as big of a deal. You're just going to lose some precision. Obviously, we don't want you to be missing measurements, but we can live with those kinds of errors. So scrolling on through, I have 0 and 14 and 0 and 14. That looks like a data entry error because we don't usually measure heights back to back along a line. So again, I would go back and say, okay, yep, it's the same plot, it's the same line 34 and 35. Something happened there, and I would go talk to the field crew and see what's up. And chances are one of those measurements is incorrect, and I would delete it. Okay. Are there any questions about dealing with line point intercept data? All right. So going back, we also have gap intercept, and similarly, you can do a comprehensive report, which pulls out plot level summaries and all detailed data, which pulls out every entry that has been made for all of the plots. So both of those are helpful to look. The other thing that is important to do between gap and LPI is to make sure that your indicator values are consistent. And finally, you can also do similar things with soil stability and species richness. You can look at those reports and make sure things are consistent and lining up. Okay. So at this point in the webinar, we have a couple minutes for questions, if folks have any questions. And if not, I'll turn it over to Sarah Lamagna. All right, Sarah, you ready?
Yep.
Okay, it's all you.
And everybody can see my screen? Yes, okay. Okay, so I'm Sarah Lamagna. I am an ecologist here at the National Operations Center, and I deal a lot with the data that comes in at the end of the season. I'm the one who actually will upload it into Terrestrial at the end. And so I just kind of wanted to go over a couple of things for early and mid-season checks, and then as well as what we're expecting at the end of the season as well. I don't know how many field crews are on the phone, because obviously I know it's in the middle of the day and they might be on the field, but yeah, if you are on a field crew or a project lead, this is pretty important. So so when to submit DIMAs for the early season. So for now, it's kind of after your first or second hitch. I know a lot of field crews have already started and they've are done with their first hitch. You'll be getting an email from one of the Sarahs at the NOC here, either Sarah Burnett or me, probably this week. And we'll want your latest DIMA and everything in it. So if you had collected paper forms or collected data on paper forms, then please make sure that you put it all into DIMA. And then I'll go over kind of what I'm expecting for these early season ones. We also do a mid-season check as well, and that's about 1 to 1.5 months after your first hitch. So not quite the middle of your season, but just to kind of catch any other errors that might have come up. And the point of this is to do exactly that, to catch those errors as soon as possible so that you're not doing it throughout the whole field season. And so you'll be getting an email from me or Sarah Burnett, and these are for non-GBI crews. All the GBI crews, Wade Laurence and Laura will actually be contacting you, or maybe they already have, and they've got their own QA steps And so it's pretty similar to what we do, but I would always work through them first, and then we will coordinate directly with the GBI data specialists. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay, so what exactly we're looking for when a DIMA is submitted for these early and mid-season checks. So first thing is that your sites and plots are organized. So as you can see here on the screenshot, you know, it's separated by their strata, and so you know, they've got the alkaline, aspen woodland, you know, and so on. And then they have each of their plots labeled in a pretty nice way. It's very clean looking. It's not confusing. Other years there have been projects that have labeled things just with numbers, which we don't recommend. And so it's easiest to have something that just looks really clean. It's very organized. It just makes things a lot easier in the long run, both for the project and when it gets ingested into Terredat. And I think, yeah, the recommendation basically has been use some sort of strata. So people use either, you know, ESDs or by allotment, things like that. It doesn't totally matter, but just make sure it's consistent and that it does, you know, fit an organized look. We're also looking for the plot descriptions to be fully completed. So when you click on a plot and then you click on a button called Edit Plot, this will come up, and this will be the first tab, this General tab, and we want to make sure everything is filled out in here, and so that includes, you know, the directions to the plot. People don't think that's as important, but it really is, especially for the next field season. If you're returning to that plot, you know, make sure you have your ecological site, you know, everything filled out here, slope, aspect, everything. It really helps us understand what the plot was like. Then also make sure you have your GPS coordinates in there. I know that Jornada has been recommending that we use NAD 83 decimal degrees, and I would say that's a good recommendation. And that, but if you are using WGS 84 or UTMs or anything like that, just make sure you're consistent and that you're making all of the correct data entry into DIMA. It's how we get all of the data into Terredat, is making sure that the DIMA is correct. We do our own conversion here at the NOC. The BLM standard is geographic NAD 83, and so we'll do a conversion here anyway, just to make sure everyone is in the same datum. But yeah, the key message is, you know, make sure you're using one, a good datum, not like NAD 27 or something like that, and make sure that you stay consistent. You can see here too on the screenshot that all the lines have, you know, the azimuth and then the start and end for each of the transects. So that's also important. If there's any disturbances or the management history, we want to know about that. You know, what are some recent disturbances? You know, was there a wildfire, etc. So just make sure you fill out as much as you can. Also, the data itself, we need all data forms fully completed. So you remember just seeing Sarah explain how you can find out that you have all 3 transects for each of the different methods. So, you know, we're looking at gap intercept, line point intercept, species richness, and then soil stability, and then sort of anything else that you guys have known that you're collecting. So if you're collecting the interpreting indicators for rangeland health or plant density, make sure that you have all of that as well. And then if there is missing data, like Sarah had said, please report to us in a Word document, Excel document, it doesn't matter. I do have a template that I can send around to people of how I would collect all the missing data, and so I'm happy to send that around. Another thing that's big that is often overlooked is that growth habits and durations aren't assigned. So I just want to make sure that people will make sure that they, for every species that they encounter, there needs to be a growth habit and a duration assigned, meaning is it a forb, is it perennial, things like that. So, and if you have questions on how to do that, you can always just give me a call or Sarah McCord. We can let you know how to do that. So any questions about the early or mid-season checks at all? Man, tough crowd. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the end of season quality control that happens, because at that point it is quality control. We are no longer out in the field. You know, this is stuff that we're trying to fix after the fact. So going back to Sarah McCord's definitions of what quality assurance and what quality control is. So this is the terrestrial data flow timeline. So Sarah showed kind of a generic one. And this is sort of a little bit more detailed. And you know, we're here right in June, in early June, where it says, you know, I'm going to be sending out an email for early DIMAs. And so I'm going to try to catch some errors and you know, answer any questions that the field crews might have, things like that. So that's kind of where we're at now. At the end of the season, we need a bunch of different things from both the field crew and the project leads. And then it goes, the data itself goes through a bunch of QC steps, including the project lead will take a look at it, then the state office, and then the NOC here. And then once it's all finalized, we'll upload that into Terredat, and then from there we actually will send a final QC DIMA back to the project lead to make sure that we're all working off the same final DIMA. And then once it's in Terredat, then you use the data. So big take-home messages. So within 1 month of the conclusion of data collection, the field crews will need to submit a couple of things. And this all needs to be done through their project lead. The project lead is their main point of contact. They need to be involved with the data side of things, as well as all of the logistics as well. But and so that's really important that the project lead doesn't get left out of this. So what we need from the field crews is obviously a QC DIMA. Like Sarah had said, we need the latest version, which currently is 3.1. And again, you know, we need all the forms completed. Make sure you have GPS coordinates for every plot. Make sure you have the growth habits and durations assigned to all species, and then again, documentation of missing data. And like I said, I can send out the template that I have for that. And then we're also going to need a shapefile of the actual GPS locations. And there's going to be some more guidance. I'll talk a little bit more about this. But we've actually got a template as well for you guys to fill that out for you guys to bring it back to the NOC. And so hopefully within the next month we'll have that done and then be able to send that to you guys so that you can get that started. I did talk with Wade yesterday. I know he's not on the phone, but for GBI, you're going to send your final DIMA. The crew leads will send your final DIMA to your data specialist. I know Wade deals with all of the Nevada projects, and then Laura deals with all the non-Nevada projects. You got to send that within 2 weeks of the conclusion of data collection. And then again, NOC will coordinate with the data specialist directly to get the finalized DIMA. Again, the project lead will be involved with all of this as well. We also need photos, and so part of monitoring, we need photos for the 3 transects, the soil pit, and anything else that you feel is nationally worthy. If you take several photos of the transects, or if you take several photos of the soil pits, make sure you're only sending us 1 or 2 if you couldn't get a full photo of the soil pit or something. But just make sure that you're not just sending us everything that you've taken a picture of. We are implementing a new naming convention this year. Some of you last year have done it. We sent it a little too late in the season to actually have everyone use it, but from 2015 on, we're having everyone use these or use this naming convention. So you know you're going to do your project name, the plot ID, which is it should match the plot ID in DIMA, the description, meaning is it a transect, a soil pit, or some miscellaneous photo, and then the date that it was taken. And then again, limit photos that are relevant to this project. So again, GBI crews, you're going to work with your project lead and the GBI data specialist to submit the photos. And then, so moving on from the field crews, so the project leads will submit the following. So one is the sample design documentation. Most of you would have filled out a project design worksheet when you were first initiating an AIM project with Emily or Sarah or someone else at the NOC or Jornada. If NOC or Jornada did the sample design, we'll just need the design plot locations and the status of them. Again, we'll be sending out an email with guidelines as to how those shapefiles should look. And then if you did the sample design, so if NOC and Jornada were not involved, we'll need more than just the design plot locations and status. We'll actually need strata boundaries in the study area, and there's a couple of other things. But again, there will be very detailed guidelines coming, I would say, in the next month. So Sarah Burnett, one of the other Sarahs, she is working tirelessly on getting that all figured out. So. And then lastly, so the project leads will also submit the end of field season implementation summary. And Emily had sent this out maybe a month ago, I think, to a lot of our project leads. So let us know if you didn't receive the template for this implementation summary. But basically, it needs to be filled out by the project leads. Your field crews can help you fill out some of it. And see how, you know, the data collection, the training, and the QAQC portions went. But most of it is, you know, we want feedback about, you know, the planning and funding phase, design, the training, the data collection, QAQC, the storage portion, analysis and reporting, whether it be tools or anything else. And then if there's any other feedback for the AIM team, kind of goes in this this little implementation summary. It's only, you know, 2 to 3 pages. It's nothing huge, but it just gives us an idea, you know, what worked, what didn't work, you know, and can help you with your future monitoring needs. So, and then after all of this QC takes place, all of the clean data gets uploaded into Terredat, and from there, it's currently in a feature service that can be accessed by anyone in BLM. And I do have a user manual for Terredat to send around to people if they don't know how to get to it yet. And yeah, so basically what Terredat is it shows all of the plot locations and then provides all of these summaries of all the core indicators. And we're working pretty hard on getting a GeoCortex tool set up, as well as improving this feature service. So within the next week or so, we'll have actually an updated version of Terredat, and I'll send out an email to everyone letting them know that it's been updated, and then I will probably end up doing a Terredat webinar to show all the new updates. So that's all I have. Are there questions on what's sort of expected from the NOC? Nope. Did I miss anything, Sarah, or did I say anything wrong? If you need to reiterate anything.
No, I think this is really great. One thing as you were talking that occurred to me is it's really important and helpful to the extent that you can document your paper trail of what happened this season. Both for helping folks who come in the future learn more about the process and what to expect, but also when we start using data from Terrestrial and start to have some questions, it's really great to have a really nice, tight supporting package of this is what happened, and that might help explain either some of the results or help alleviate any fears that an undocumented error occurred. So, that's everything from the photos to these summaries to a missing or known error log, to even just having an extra GPS waypoint file of these are the waypoints that we took in the field. So if there's any question about the GPS locations, we can default back to that. All of that makes the sleuthing process much more clean later down the road when folks who are using the data for data analysis start to have questions. Which hopefully they won't, because all of your data is going to be so nice and pretty.
That's right.
Hi, Sarah. This is Tina Boucher, and I have a question about the quality control end. How often do you want us to send if we find errors as we're using the data, like down the road, like for example, just last week I found a few things in updating some of my summaries. Is it like something we should be doing every couple months, or
yes? So
you probably don't want every little thing I find as I find it.
No. So the big thing to remember, so once it makes its way to the NOC, the data gets pretty, I don't want to use the word locked, just because people don't like that word. And obviously, if you find a mistake, we want to know. So I would say hopefully you don't get too many errors after it makes its way to the NOC, just because we actually have a bunch of automatic QC stuff that we do that will catch a lot of errors. And so it just sort of depends. It's why we end up sending back the finalized DIMA so that everyone's working off the same the same one, so that you can make sure that the errors haven't already been corrected.
Yeah, these are errors that I wouldn't have any way of finding unless you kind of knew the plants or the sites.
So I guess my recommendation then would be just give me a call or Sarah Burnett a call, and we can work with you on getting that fixed, because then we'll have to re-upload it into Terrestrial to make sure that it's correct.
Right. It kind of comes up because we have a data request. Some of our partners in Alaska want all of our AIM data, and I just want to make sure I get everything I can corrected before it gets shipped off to them.
Yeah.
Okay, it's only two little things, but they're important.
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, feel free to give me a call.
Okay. And then a question about Terrestrial. Well, is that getting ready to be the main platform for using the data, or are we still going to be using the actual DIMA databases for data extraction and analysis for some time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now you can use Terrestrial. I know, Tina, being with the Alaska Natural Heritage Program, you guys, I'm not sure, have access to it because it is just BLM. Like if you're on the BLM network. And so you can use the data now. And the point is that, yes, it will be sort of that interface from here at the NOC and actually synthesizing some of the data. The issue with Terrestrial at the moment is that it's just plot data, and so when you want to do any sort of analysis with it, there needs to be a lot of conversation between the projects and then NOC or NADA to make sure that you're incorporating the sample design correctly and analyzing the data correctly. And so, we're working on a GeoCortex tool to also help with a little bit more of the reporting side of things. But DIMA still is useful for supplemental indicator reporting, as well as right now, if you want to do reporting by species, things like that. But our GeoCortex tool will actually report on species or on individual species. But any sort of supplemental indicator, we just don't have the capacity to do that here at the NOC. And so I would say it's kind of a combination of both, but we're veering away from DIMA being the reporting tool and more of a data collection tool, and Terredat is the storage and reporting tool.
Okay, yeah, that pretty much answers my question. I was just, since we're always interested in the actual, species level information, so I wasn't sure how sure that was live in Terredat.
Yep.
Good to know it's going that direction.
Yeah, that was a good question. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else? Well, I'm good, Sarah.
Okay, if you want to pass control back to me.
Yeah, how do I do that? Stop sharing.
There you go.
Did I do it?
You stopped sharing. I'm trying to grab it back. But so there we go.
Sorry.
Okay, I got it. So up on the screen are some resources that are available to you in this process. I mentioned the landscape toolbox several times. There's some other DIMA tutorials up there. We'll post the recording from this webinar there. There's previously recorded webinars also hosted on that site.
Hey, oh, there you go. It wasn't showing before, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, along with a range of other resources are all available at the Landscape Toolbox, including a methods FAQ. So if you have some questions about implementing a method, feel free to shoot me an email, but more than likely that question has already been asked by a previous implementer, and is answered on the methods FAQ on the Landscape Toolbox. So you should definitely check that out. But at any point in time, you can contact any one of the Sarahs, and we will happily either provide you with assistance or point you in the right direction. So unless there's any other questions, thanks so much for joining today. And yeah, best of luck with your quality assurance and quality control process.
Yeah.